Hi, everybody. Today is Wednesday, January 15th, and our friend Ray McGovern is back with us. Welcome back, Ray.
Thank you.
Let's get started, Ray, with what's going on between Israel and Hamas. How do you find the situation? Do you think this time are we gonna getting to the point that we're gonna have some sort of ceasefire, or maybe after that a permanent ceasefire?
Well, when I grew up in New York, we had an expression, Nima, it was kick the tires. And that simply meant that if you're buying a car, particularly a used car, you want to look not only at the tires, but the rest of the machinery before you bought it. Caveat emptor, right? Well, I'm going to say kick the tires of this new arrangement. It's terribly complicated. There are all kinds of chances for Netanyahu to perish the thought, cheat on it. And the wonder is that Trump and his people were able to get this done when it could have been done in April and saved tens of thousands of dead Palestinians. I mean, that's the crucial element here. Now, how did Trump get it done? Well, the word is that he sent his emissary, different from Biden's emissary. Biden's emissary served in the Israeli army. Biden's emissary was, of Israeli extraction and in other words, he could not even pretend to be an honest broker. This fellow that Trump picked to be his emissary is reported to have said, look, I'm coming. I want to see you tomorrow, Netanyahu. And Netanyahu and his folks, oh, we can't do that. That's the Sabbath. And apparently this emissary said, Sabbath Shmabbath, I want to see you tomorrow. I'm coming. And they saw him and he read the riot act to them on behalf of Biden? No, on behalf of Trump. So if that story is true, and if it is true, as seems to be the case, that Trump retweeted Jeffrey Sachs's tweet about, not tweet, but his speech about Netanyahu as a son of a bee, okay, and they can't be trusted. Well, Trump is playing hardball with Netanyahu so far. Now, all I would say is kick the tires, look at what these provisions really say. Whether Hamas and or Israel will live up to them is another question. I find it good, for God's sake, a ceasefire, even if it expires within a couple of days, less people will be killed. But I haven't had a chance to read it in detail because it's just been announced. And I looked at all the reports about it before today, and none of them gave me great confidence that it will stick. Now, again, the new player in this game is Trump. He has the opportunity, he has the power to make it stick. Whether he will be as subservient to Israel's interests as Biden has been is another question. The betting is that he will be, but I don't know. These are positive signs. We'll have to see how it plays out. We'll have to just wait and see what the next weeks bring.
Ray, it seems that the CIA director, Bill Burns, he stated that Iran made a decision in 2003 not to pursue nuclear weapons and has not changed its policy, which it seems to me that he repeats the words that the way that you were talking about the Iranian nuclear program. Let me play your clip talking about it before Bill Burns putting out his opinion.
And I'd like to start with Iran, if that's okay with you. Mostly because some of your people, like Jake Sullivan are sort of saying that maybe this is the time to teach Iran a lesson. Maybe let Netanyahu start bombing the hell out of Iran. Maybe they're working on a nuclear weapon. Well, Mr. President, before I say anything else, I have to tell you that in November of 2007, the intelligence community, not just the CIA, but all of us, decided and wrote that Iran had stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003, had not resumed work on that. That was unanimous. It was supported by all 16 at the time agencies, and it was expressed with high confidence. Why do I mention that? Because it was clear that Junior Bush and Cheney wanted to start a war with Iran in their final year in office. So there was some sort of parallels there. You know, as you're going out, you stir up trouble if you're people like Bush, Cheney, or I dare say Mr. Sullivan. Now, just so you know, we see no evidence that Iran has decided to work on a nuclear weapon or is working on a nuclear. Sure, they have lots of uranium and lots of highly enriched uranium, but the nub has always been a nuclear weapon. They're not doing that yet. So if somebody tells you, let's say, oh, who would it be, Blinken or Sullivan? They tell you that we got evidence now that the Iranians are working on a nuclear weapon. Please kick the tires, as they used to say where I come from. Kick the tires real hard and see if this is real. Ask us, because we're going to tell you the real deal. We're not going to tell you what we think you or Sullivan or Blinken want to hear. It's really important, Mr. President. We've been saying this every year since 2007. I do the math. It's 2025 now. They're still not working on it. Now, could they start? Sure, they could, but there's no evidence that they decided to. I just want to let you know that's our bottom line. If you hear anything else from others, please come and double check with us.
Yeah.
Nima, I had no idea that Burns would say precisely the same things. I mean, it was almost like a reading from my script, which was non-existent. I didn't have a script. And so how do we explain all this? Well, I think Sullivan and Blinken were pressing to allow Israel to bomb the hell out of those nuclear facilities in Iran before they went out of office. And they only have, 4 or 5 days left, okay? It was pretty clear that was happening. Sullivan was talking about, there were reports a month ago that he was briefing Biden on how you do this, what kind of plan that there would be. And so I was trying, this, by the way, I should explain. I do a weekly president's brief to President Robert Scher from Scher Post. So this is sort of our little act, okay? And so I chose last Friday to do precisely what you saw. That was 2 minutes of it, okay? So I was addressing President Biden and warning him that these guys are just very much likely to say, look out, watch out. They're working on a nuclear weapon now because Netanyahu told us and he gave us photos and everything. This has happened before. So I thought that the only service I could perform would be to warn the people watching this that we don't have any evidence. And I was just assuming that was true because it was said last February in the annual threat assessment that the CIA and the National Intelligence Director write. But here comes Bill Burns, published yesterday in an interview with NPR, saying precisely the same things. Now, I guess he wants to go out as a semi-honest man. He wanted to prevent, like I did, these guys, Blinken and Sullivan, from stirring up a war on the way out of this administration. So I take my hat off to him. After all, he's been wrong about many things, like Putin already having lost the war in Ukraine. He said that in early July 2003, okay? So he's been so wrong about many things. Maybe he's decided to save his soul by going out and say, well, at least this main issue, I can at least assure not only the president, but the American people. I'll say it to NPR, and they'll feature it, which they did. And he said precisely the same things. I have the transcript here, but I don't want to go through it again. Well, yeah, let's see here. Now, he said that there were things from others that are saying that Iran is so weak that it might do this, that work on a nuclear weapon. And, Jerusalem Post yesterday quoted Blinken. Well, Blinken, the guy who's been promoting the notion that they could have enough enriched uranium in 1 or 2 weeks. Yeah, but even Blinken admits, according to the Jerusalem Post here, that the rub is, what does he say? Even if, let's see, they could, if we attack them, they could rebuild deeper. And then he said, look, they have accumulated enough fissile material and could upgrade that material to bomb-grade quality within a week or so. But, however, actually developing a weapon would take far longer, he stressed. Bottom line for me is that the Pentagon doesn't want to bless Netanyahu for attacking Iran and getting into a regional war where the U.S. would feel compelled to come to Israel's aid. Neither does the CIA. Here's Burns being honest for once, and on his way out, he and the Pentagon are saying, look, Blinken and Sullivan are leading you down a wrong path here. And even Blinken yesterday, according to the Jerusalem Post, said, yeah, fissile material, yes, but it'll take years to build. So they're backing off on that. I don't know. I have no idea. Well, I've been saying this for a while, so I know maybe Bill Burns caught wind of what we honest analysts are saying. But in any case, he stepped up to the plate and he said, just like we said in 2007, the Iranians stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003 and have not resumed work on a nuclear weapon. That's big. And I just wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to tell the rest of our listeners or our viewers that this is the case and that Blinken and Sullivan are not going to get their attack by Netanyahu on Iran unless they try it in the next couple of days, which even I am more comfortable in saying, no, that's not going to work because they need the Pentagon and they need the CIA to endorse this plan. They don't have it.
Ray, do you find the situation between Israel and Turkey, and on the other hand with Egypt, do you find this sort of, I would say, political attrition between these countries is that of concern for Donald Trump?
Well, it should be. But as he looks at things in their present state, he sees that Israel is much stronger than it was just a couple of months ago. I don't think people should play that down. That's the reality. They have taken considerable parts of Syria. They've obliterated Syrian air defenses. And I guess sotto voce, with an agreement with Ukraine, with Turkey, and with the United States, they've pretty much divided up Syria. And of course, we have this fellow Jalani, who actually has endorsed, for example, the new Lebanese government led by our own clown, our own Quisling, our own guy, Aoun, okay? As Craig Murray, the wonderful reporter, pointed out right before the Parliament building in Beirut, not only were the Americans and the Saudis, for God's sake, and others supporting this American puppet, but so was Jalani. My God, what did that say? So, long story short, Israelis have extended themselves in a way that, at least on paper, looks like they've got a wider Lebensraum. They've expanded Israel proper. Now, how long that can last, how long that can last before they sort of fringe on what Turkey says is their prerogatives, and how long the U.S. can support moderate rebels. Giuliani used to be a bad rebel. Now he's a moderate rebel. It's a can of worms. So I would not even deign to predict what's going to happen in 8 months or 9 months. But for the nuns, it has to be recognized that Hezbollah, all the Shia, the Iran, and of course Syria are on the back foot. And that's why Sullivan and Blinken was, now's the time you might want to consider, they're very weak, these Iranians, and they might resort to a nuclear weapon. Well, we've talked about that. It's a can of worms. What will happen with this new deal on the hostages is anybody's guess. My guess is as good as anybody else's, so I won't give you my guess.
Ray, do you understand what does Donald Trump want with Iran and nuclear deal? Because there was a nuclear deal, JCPOA, which he has decided to withdraw from. Mm-hmm. And right now he's talking, it doesn't seem to me that he wants a war with Iran. He's not interested in that so far from what we've heard from him. And
this is the new Donald Trump. Now, it is true that he got out of the JCPOA, the protocol, that the nuclear deal, which eliminated any threat of nuclear from Iran for 10 years, for God's sake. It was painstakingly worked out by Obama and his negotiators. Russia helped. Russia was proud of helping, okay? Then for some reason, Trump said, get out of there. Well, who told him to get out of there? The military-industrial complex, the people who profiteer from building more and more precise, more and more accurate nuclear missiles, okay? Now, that was during the first term. The other thing he did was to get out of the most important treaty since the ABM Treaty of 1972, and that was the INF, the Intermediate Forces Nuclear Treaty, okay? That destroyed a whole class of intermediate and shorter range nuclear missiles, most of them in Europe, okay? Why did he do that? Because the military wanted to develop intermediate range nuclear missiles, and Russia said, well, if you're going to play that game, we'll do the same thing. And the result was the Oryezhnik, okay? Oryezhnik missile, which cannot be defended against. So we say, well, why did Trump do those, in my view, not so bright things? Under pressure from people who wanted to build and profiteer from wars, but also under pressure from people who would say, the Russians are terrible. And if you give in, if you let this treaty stand that the Russians helped build, well, you're in Putin's pocket. Why do I mention all that? Because this is not the old Trump. It's a new guy. And the fact that he feels free to criticize U.S. policy toward Ukraine, for example, why are we firing those longer-range missiles into Ukraine? Well, that's foolish. And why did we stop the treaty that was going to stop this in just 6 weeks after the attack on Ukraine? Why did we do that? The Ukrainians and the Russians, that's crazy too. So he's pointing this stuff out without fear or favor, okay? And he's not under, and it's a first term. This is his last term, okay? All those factors into this equation. And I think that when he saw this Oryezhnik missile that cannot be defended against because it flies at Mach 10 or more, okay? He said, my God, that was really kind of stupid that I bowed to the Pentagon and said, okay, we're going to develop our own intermediate range missiles, and so we'll get out of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. And he did that after 32 years of its being enforced. Well, I think maybe he has the option of wising up here, and for whatever it's worth, he wants to turn his attention to the Far East. I think that's a terrible mistake, but that's the reality. Is he going to get bogged down in Ukraine or even in Southwest or West Asia? I don't know. But if he really and truly thinks China is the main problem, as the Pentagon has been saying for 5 years now, then he'd want to clean up things in Ukraine. Last thing I'll say is, does he have the leeway? Are there possibilities to negotiate? Putin's very hardline terms. Well, the hardest point, of course, is Ukraine membership in NATO. That's 90% of the problem. Now, has Trump said something about that? Oh, yeah, he has. As a matter of fact, just a week ago, what did he say? He said, who came up with the idea of bringing Ukraine into NATO? I can understand why the Russians wouldn't want to heavily fortified Ukraine right on their border. I can understand that. My God, So now, would Trump, number one, during his first term, have been able to say that? Of course not. Is he sympathizing? No, he's understanding how Russia would look at this. Now, that's the key. Understanding and talking. Now, it has been 1 month short of 3 years since an American president has talked to a Russian president. Now, that is big. The very fact that they will start talking, and Trump has made it clear it's going to be real quick now, that's a big plus. And they'll get a good idea as where the leeway is in both sides. Trump himself has said that Russia's position on Ukraine in NATO is stone. He said, as hard as stone. Okay, well, if he appreciates that, there's leeway. Now people say, no leeway on that. Well, Nima, I think NATO is going to fall apart. So what if Putin thinks so too? What's to prevent him from doing an agreement which says, with respect to Ukraine and NATO, we'll revisit that in 25 years. No decision on that now. 25 years from now, there'll be no NATO, in my view. And so there is that kind of flexibility. And after all, as I've said before, Trump can also say, look, I got a stone-bound undertaking from my old friend Vladimir Putin that he's not going to take over all Ukraine. And he's certainly not going to take over Poland or the Baltic states. Now, Biden pointed that out. That's what he wanted to do. I got a commitment to him. He's not going to do that. And we're watching very closely to make sure he doesn't do that. Well, he never intended to do that at all. But the American people don't know that. The American people will say, whoa, did he really get it? Oh, wow. You mean Poland and Baltic states? So there's lots of leeway there. The big thing is that they're talking. And I expect that Trump will be meeting Putin perhaps somewhere in Turkey or some quasi-neutral place. I don't think they'll meet in Geneva. I mean, the Swiss have pretty much joined NATO in many ways. The Russians are really down on the Swiss. It could be Geneva, of course, but they'll meet pretty soon, and I think they'll take each other's, they'll look at each other and figure out, well, is this a guy I could deal with, and can we finally get rid of this Ukraine thing? Russia has pretty much won. Let's see what we can salvage from it, and, why don't worry about what people say about me being in Putin's pocket anymore. Americans are sick of this war. So are 50% of Ukrainians.
It seems that those people who are in favor of NATO and the strategy and the future of NATO, they want Russia to be the enemy forever. This is the main concern, Ray, right now. Even with the coming administration, here is Mike Waltz talking about, let me play a clip of Mike Waltz talking about the conflict in Ukraine.
In the coming days and weeks. So that would be a step. We'll take it from there. I will say, the other thing that we're going to need to see is really stabilizing things on the battlefield. And one of the things that we'll be asking of the Ukrainians is they have real manpower issues. Their draft age right now is 26 years old, not 18. I don't think a lot of people realize that. They could generate hundreds of thousands of new soldiers. So when we hear about morale problems, when we hear about issues on the front line, look, if the Ukrainians have asked the entire world to be all in for democracy, we need them to be all in for democracy. And they certainly have fought bravely. They certainly have taken a very noble and tough stand. But we need to see those manpower shortages addressed. This isn't just about munitions, ammunition, or writing more checks. It's about seeing the front lines stabilize so that we can enter into some type of deal.
Ray, how long do they want Russia to be the ultimate enemy in order to keep NATO just surviving? Because without Russia, without having this enemy who wants to march toward Europe, what's the reason behind NATO?
Nima, there's a lot of money. There's a lot of profiteering to be made by having an enemy. In the middle of the 90s and early 2000s, it was hard to make Russia out to be an enemy. For example, the main German-French consortium tasked with building the common European battle tank was dead in the water. They couldn't get funny. There was really a problem for them. And then all of a sudden, whoa, there was a coup in Ukraine, and then Russia became all of a sudden a big threat. Even then, Nima, even then, if people thought that Russia was a big threat, why did they not build the basic 155 millimeter shells that fit all their weapons, their artillery, and why did they not do that? Well, because they didn't really believe that. And there's no money in 1.5 millimeter shells. The money is in building more sophisticated things. Sometimes they don't even work, but they're very sophisticated. It doesn't matter whether they help on the battlefield, they get a lot of money. So that's the first thing. Now, the other thing is really kind of cynical. I mean, not on my part, on the part of Mike Waltz, who, by the way, has said he's been briefed thoroughly by Jake Sullivan, okay, his predecessor. Okay, so Waltz will be taking over in just a couple of days now. Sullivan has briefed him quite well because Mike Waltz is parroting the things he hears from Sullivan. Now, one thing is wrong. He's at 26 years old. They do recruit down to 25 years old, okay? But here's Sullivan 4 weeks ago. I don't know what it is with those Ukrainians. We gave them everything they could possibly need in the most sophisticated weaponry, tanks and aircraft and artillery, and they didn't have enough troops to man them. And they're unwilling to draft 18-year-olds, 18 up to 25. And so it's not our fault. I mean, it's really, why did the Ukrainians, why did they shy away from what we did in Vietnam, making sure 18, 19, so that's what he's told Waltz. And that's what Waltz is telling the people who watch TV. That's terribly cynical, for God's sake, The Ukrainians have real trouble in the Rada, in their parliament, selling the notion of sending more 18 to 25-year-olds into the slaughter. And I just remind people, because this is sort of the axiom. Obama knew this. Obama knew that the worst thing, and he told his advisors, it's right in the New York Times if you want to look at it, told his advisors, The last thing we can do, the worst thing we could do for the Ukrainians would be to give them the idea that they could prevail over a much stronger Russia. So let's not give them offensive weapons. And he made that stick. God knows, maybe not even God, why Biden and Sullivan and Blinken reversed that and thought that they could weaken Russia by using these poor Ukrainians as proxies I mean, it didn't make any sense under Obama. Why did it all of a sudden make sense under Biden? So when Mike Waltz makes these points, he's just repeating the situation up till now. He's repeating what he's been told by Sullivan. And I don't think we should give much weight to it because not Obama, but Trump is coming in, right? And Trump is going to tell Mike Waltz and he's going to tell everybody else what to do, including Marco Rubio. So my notion is that when this public propaganda stuff gets over, when people realize that Russia can indeed take over everything in Ukraine up to the Dnieper River quite easily now, that the Russians have already put out some feelers, which I have reported, that, well, they don't want to take all these places. I mean, if you look at Odessa or Kharkiv or Nikolaev or Dnipropetrovsk, we don't want all of them, you know. So they're willing to deal on these things, it seems to me. And once they get beyond this propaganda thing and criticizing the Ukrainians for being misled into sacrificing a generation from 25 years old up to people almost as old as I am, okay? Once they get off that hook, there's a reasonable chance that Trump, since he wants to end this damn thing, and so does Putin, they'll come to some kind of agreement. It'll take a while, more than 100 days, I think. But it's in the cards, and that's why these military-industrial complex people are really shaking in their boots, because if Russia becomes less of an enemy, there's less profiteering from building, selling weapons.
Ray, when Donald Trump started choosing these people who are going to work with him in his administration, we were all thinking of who's this, who's that, if they can help Donald Trump in his strategy, or they're gonna go against him. And we were all optimistic about Tulsi Gabbard and her position and the changes that she could bring to the administration. What's going on right now with Tulsi Gabbard and the new changes that are happening in her position?
Well, I'm sorry to say that the same thing is happening to Tulsi Gabbard that happened to Barack Obama in the last months of his campaign, his first campaign to become president of the United States. The deep state is really strong, okay? Tulsi Gabbard in previous years had made it clear that she opposes blanket surveillance of Americans in direct opposition to the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. You know, it's worth reminding people what the Fourth Amendment says. Let's see if I can do it from memory. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, possessions, offices, and homes from illegal searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue except upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and describing in particular the places to be searched and the people or things to be seized, period, end quote. Now, as you know, way back in Bush's time, this was violated. There is a section of the FISA Act that sort of enables this despite the Fourth Amendment. And we're being listened to right now, Nima, and people making notes on what we say. The only way to prevent this is to make sure that these things are not collected. Let me give you one little vignette. So a bunch of us from veteran intelligence professionals for Sanity were in Berlin, must be about 10 years ago. And the Stasi, the East German Security Service, the files had been opened. And some spokespeople were talking to us about what it was like to have blanket surveillance, okay? And his name was Wolfgang Schmidt, okay? And he briefed us, and he said, and I remember it very distinctly, he said, the only way to prevent people from being surveilled in toto is to prevent the information from being collected in the first place, okay? If they collect the information, they have everything on you. Now, that's not to say they read it or they listen to it, but they have it, they filed away in these monster places like big depositories, okay? Why is this relevant today? Why do I mention it? Well, number one, Tulsi Gabbard is going to be up for nomination. There are 50 senators. They know that NSA has collected all manner of information on their behavior. They know that the FBI has a long tradition of blackmail, okay? Now, will Tulsi Gabbard be confirmed? Well, that depends on how much FBI, which is in receipt of the information from NSA because of these reforms, okay, how much they decide that Tulsi would be really bad for us. So what does Tulsi do? She caves after a long and many-year opposition to illegal surveillance. That's what it is. She says, oh, well, now I think I'm going to approve Section 703 of the FISA Act. Yeah, we need to do that. Otherwise, terrorists are going to come and we won't. Yeah, we're going to have blanket surveillance again. Now, I mentioned before that there's a parallel here. 2008, I guess it was, no, 2007, when Obama was running for president the first time, he was really manful as a senator. He said, those big people who, AT&T and all those big telecom is the word I'm looking for, telecom companies, they knew what they were doing. They knew it was against the Fourth Amendment. I'm going to hold them responsible, okay? Yeah, they were suborned by the National Security Agency, but they willingly participated in making all these phone calls, everything available to the American people, knowing that was against the Fourth Amendment, okay? He was really strong on that. And then in July, or June or July 2007, John Brennan joined his retinue. John Brennan, who later became head of the CIA, and all of a sudden, Obama changed his tune. And he said, yeah, I've thought this over. I'm not going to hold the giant telecoms responsible anymore. They were just trying to prevent terrorism, and so I'll bend with this. And Obama got elected. Now, here's Tulsi Gabbard saying, I used to say Section 703 is not a good idea, but I think, well, we don't want to have terrorists, right? So in hopes that she will not be elected, but that she'll be approved, she'll be nominated, she'll be put in place, okay? Now, confirmed is the word I'm looking for. Now, what does that say about Tulsi Gabbard? Well, we already had indications that she was really, really one-sided, biased toward what the Israelis are doing in the Middle East. So it's a great disappointment. I have briefed her personally. That was about 8 years ago. She's bright as hell. She knows which end is up, but she wants to be part of this administration, and she's caved in on this very, very essential thing. After all, they're having blanket surveillance on us at every turn. They can simply reach into those files, as I imagine the FBI is doing as we speak, and approaching the senators that might be inclined to say, okay, Tulsi, you could try it. And saying, well, if you vote for Tulsi Gabbard, well, remember, just so you know, Senator so-and-so, we have these records of 10 years ago when you were blah 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 blah. Okay, that's par for the course. So that's what the FBI is going to do with the receipt of all these blanket surveillance take. Okay, and Tulsi knows that. Maybe she's trying to say, well, okay, I'll bless these violations of the Fourth Amendment, and maybe you can nominate me anyway. We'll see how it turns out. But for American freedom, for the Fourth Amendment, and when you think about the circumstances when the Fourth Amendment was crafted as part of the Bill of Rights, I mean, the British were entering your homes. The British were doing all kinds of break-ins and all kinds of violations of your right to secrecy, to security. So, yeah, so that's kind of a big negative in my view. Maybe she'll be better than other people who could have been nominated to be in that position. But certainly on the matter of civil rights and the Fourth Amendment, she's now poison, in my view. Not hearing you.
Yeah, Elon Musk had a talk with the leader of AfD, or AfD, Alternative for Germany, in which many odd things. They were talking about Hitler was a communist, and it was so amazing to hear that. Hitler was defeated by communists, but they were talking about it was a communist. And the other thing that they said, that the situation in Ukraine, which is so crucial right now, is the situation in Ukraine is a stalemate. And that was confirmed by the leader of AfD in Germany. Ray, do you see the foreign policy of Germany going under some sort of changes under these people, AfD, and these people who they're calling far right? I don't know how we can call them, but they want some sort of changes. But how is that going to influence Germany's foreign policy?
Well, Nima, on the 23rd of February was the national election in Germany. There will be big changes. Now, the person who's favored to win, Merz, okay, he said all kinds of extraordinary things, like he'd be prepared to authorize the use of Taurus missiles, okay, which have twice the range almost of the U.S. ATACMS against Russia. Well, there's been a reaction to that. And for the first time in any real German public context, people, including the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, okay, have been saying, what about Nord Stream 2? What about Nord Stream 1? Do we buy the legend that it was 6 or 8 Ukrainians that rented a sailboat and a nurse? And come on, who did it? Why are you obfuscating? Not only that, but Sarah Wagenknecht's new party, which is really gaining, I think it had almost 10 or more percent up in northern Germany. Her people are saying, yeah, what about Nord Stream? Well, who did that? Okay. Now that's big because the German people have been slavishly devoted to this alliance with the U.S. But once they realize that the reason they're losing their jobs, Volkswagen, for God's sake, laying off tens of thousands of people, a job being done in China now, for God's sake, German industry being deindustrialized, for God's sake, because of the price of gas having gone up as a result of the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipelines. So the AfD has said, turn the pipeline on again, for God's sake. Now, one of them is possible to turn on. We've known that for years, okay? So what I'm saying here is that for the first time in my experience in recent years, there are people in Germany willing to step up to the United States and say, well, wait a second now. Are we going to be slavishly devoted to whatever the U.S. says? Are we going to allow intermediate range ballistic missiles to be placed in Germany like Scholz and Biden alone without any debate agreed to back last summer? Why would we do that? Oh, because of the Russians. Well, the Russians, yeah, they have intermediate range nuclear weapons, but that's because you United States, got out of the INF treaty in Trump's last year in office. What's that, 2019? So it's very complicated, but for the first time, the German public has not been suppressed to the point that they're not getting the true story about Nord Stream. There's very little attention so far being given to Seymour Hersh's detailed roundup of exactly what happened. And I testified before the UN saying, look, he's got it right. And if the CIA says he's got it wrong, well, that's sort of proof that he's got it right. Okay. So Germany is up for grabs. There's no real government in France. What's happening? That Slovakia, Hungary, Turkey, they're sort of saying, well, this is NATO's not got a very sensible policy. So as much as this new Secretary General of NATO pounds the turf and says, we got to do all this. NATO has already got not only fissures, but sort of canyons are opening up. And that's what I think if I were Putin looking on, I'd say, keep being patient. The Europeans are going to do this to themselves, for God's sake. You can go very gradually in Ukraine up to the Dnieper. You don't have to do it all. Just show them who's boss. Show them that there's nothing left of the Ukrainian army, that Kursk is a cauldron where what's left of the Ukrainian special army is encircled. I think that would be a bargaining tool for Putin to use. So let them see what's really happening on the ground. If Trump is the maker of a deal, he'll see, and we can work out some sort of face-saving device where even major cities like Odessa or Kharkiv, well, they could be made into joint internationally regulated cities, especially Odessa, because that would allow Ukraine to have access to the sea and be a real country rather than just a farmland for the rest of Europe. So there are the makings of the deal there. It's just that the Germans are going to be having a voice in this, and I don't think Merz is going to get very much endorsement of his plan to do what the U.S. and Britain and France have been trying to do, and that is weaken Russia by firing missiles of 200-mile range into Russia proper. Taurus goes almost 400 miles. But did the German people really think that's a good idea? I dare say they probably don't. And if the media in Germany grows up and stops aping the media in the UK and the US, we're going to have a real election on the 23rd of February. I'm glad you asked that question, because my friends in Germany are very enthusiastic about the possibilities here, and they're trying to break through the mainstream media, which is a major task in Germany.
Ray, if we assume that Donald Trump would go after negotiations with Russia and putting an end to the conflict as soon as possible, when you look at the countries in the European Union and European countries, which one is the most important one to oppose the United States policies with Russia? I'm talking about the policy of negotiations with Russia. Who's going to oppose the United States, and who has the greatest leverage on the United States?
Well, I mentioned France. They don't really have much of a government. And if the forces that have the majority come into being, there's going to be trouble for the alliance in France. Now, Germany is less predictable. Despite the positive gloss I've given to the situation before the election, God knows if the Germans will ever grow up. God knows if they'll ever start acting like adults and saying no to the United States, even when the United States blows up the Nord Stream pipeline and damages their economy almost beyond repair, okay? So if they don't object to that, what would they object to? I have some hope that they finally come to their senses, and the people who are calling now, big people, the head of the AfD and Sarah Wagenknecht's folks, they're saying, look, let me just say one more time, because Sarah Wagenknecht has an incredible deputy. Her name is Sevim Dagledin. And what she said, well, about a year ago, I've memorized because it speaks. It's very brief. I'll say it in German first. Unsere erste Pflicht ist, sich von diesem Königreich von Lügen nicht dumm machen zu lassen. Okay. Unsere erste Pflicht, our first duty, ist, sich von diesem Königreich, von this kingdom, Königreich, this kingdom von Lügen, Königreich of lies, okay, nicht dumm machen zu lassen, which means not let ourselves be made dumb. Dumb is dumb, okay? Now, Sarah Wagenknecht's party is going to have a share of the vote now above 5%, I predict, and therefore be entitled to some share in governance. What will happen if people like Sevim Dagdelin come forward and say, look, here's the real deal. Let's not let ourselves continue to be made dumb. Let's stand up, look out for our own national interests, restart the Nord Stream pipeline, reach out to Russia as a possible trading partner and friend, and let's loosen these chains that bind us or have bound us to the United States for the last 80 years.
Thank you so much, Ray, for being with us today. Great
You're most
pleasure,
welcome.
as always.
Thanks, Nima.